Hello everyone, and welcome to Not the Game Dev Show. It's a little different today because Jason Wyman couldn't make it, and so we put this together. Jason Storey and I are here via my Zoom on the Infinity PBR channel. I can hear myself with a short echo, so if I get a little confused, that's why. Can everyone hear Jason okay?
Yeah, let me know if I sound okay and if my volume's all right. We'll probably have to do a bit of tweaking to make sure everything works before we get started.
Same with me. I might be louder than him. If that's the case, let me know. So, Jason, what have you been up to?
That's a very tough question.
Oh,
At the moment, actually, I was writing. I was working on something for screen resolutions just earlier today. I was working on a test project, and I always hate how demo projects never really let you jump between different resolutions. So I was putting together a little quick drop-down box that let me choose the different resolutions for a project and jump between full screen and windowed, and nothing too crazy. That's what I was working on earlier. And of course, as per my YouTube channel, I've been working on a new video. But
nice.
I talked to a few people about the contents of the new video, and it seems it wasn't very clear. So the idea I was trying to cover was maybe a bit higher level than I thought they were. So I'm gonna have to dial that one back and restructure that video to make it easier to cover.
Okay. Okay. I think I can make Jason a little louder here and me a little softer here.
Well,
What?
I'm seeing I'm loud, I'm too loud and too low, and some one after another.
I know. I think I was louder than you, but I'm looking at the levels and I think we're about the same now,
Okay, cool.
give or take. Uh, but yeah, welcome everybody. We got some people in the chat. I know Jason Wyman sent out an email, so we might get more people coming in. So feel free to ask questions. Now, I don't have the ability to put the questions up on the screen like Jason Wyman does, unfortunately, but we are watching the chat. So if you have any questions for Jason or lesser chance for myself, then please do ask. Jason, your new video, what is the topic of that video? I mean,
So
besides, I guess the question I have is, back in the day, Unity had that built-in resolution thing that you could load up at the beginning of the game, and was kind of default. Only the cheap games used it, but it worked well for prototypes and just demos. They don't have that anymore, and I haven't made a game in a while that has different resolutions. So when you make this, is this the type of thing that just switches instantly, or do you have to restart the application, or how does this work these days?
Oh, so okay, so the resolution thing isn't for a video. This is just for me for a test thing because I find it's easier. I'm doing some stuff with UI for an upcoming course, and for that, I wanted to be able to jump between resolutions so I could demonstrate it scaling correctly. So this is real time while the app's running. You press buttons or do something, and it will jump between different resolutions and refresh rates and that kind of thing. Now, Unity has all the features required to do that built in. There's an object called the screen class, and you can say screen dot resolutions or screen dot set size or set full screen, or there's lots of options. It's just not very clear, and you end up getting a new resolution entry for every refresh rate. So you either end up just piping the entire list of Unity available resolutions, which is just, hey, everything from 800 by 600 all the way up to 4K with every different resolution, and it gets a bit tedious. Or you just manually guess and set it based on whatever you think. And so I just never really liked either solution. So for me, I just want to have a simple setup that says I will guess what the best resolution is for your monitor plus the best refresh rate you can have. I'll set it to that to default. I will pick a resolution that's smaller down in scale. So if you're running 1920 by 1080, I'll pick 800 by 600. If you're running 4K, I'll pick 1920 by 1080, and that'll be my presumptive windowed size. And that way, you don't have to do a lot of thinking to say go from full screen to windowed. And if you want, you can go in and change them. But those kind of defaults are not set up by Unity. And when I press a button that says go from windowed mode to full screen mode, my intention is almost always full screen at a good resolution, windowed at something smaller that I can see that doesn't take up my whole monitor. But the way it works is there are different flags. So Unity will allow you to full screen something at low resolution or window mode it at full resolution, which makes it hard to grab the handles. It's all these like little weird quirks that are just obtuse, and realistically you just want two buttons. And so I realized for me, I do a lot of demo stuff where I want to show a client something, or even for myself where it's like I want to give them something that automatically opens up in a small window. There's some button or shortcut that full screens it at full resolution, and they can always toggle back and forth. So I've done this a few times in the past. I've just never written it into a little component with a drop down combo box or something. So that's what I was working on this morning. Again, it's not for anything. That was just for my own, my own enjoyment, I guess.
Just for your own enjoyment. That makes sense. Um, in resolutions on performance in a shipped game is a challenge, I think, for a lot of folks, including myself. Um, all the different devices, especially if you're doing for mobile, and if your game is fairly intensive, then various things like shadows and other quality settings are um, always a challenge.
Yeah, and that's one thing too that kind of bothers me from coming from a sort of enterprise background is to me settings are just that. They're a setting. So theoretically, you should be able to have a settings page and then just register a page of settings. Register something called video, and then on video, you register a setting. You call it full screen mode and register a checkbox or register whatever else. And then the page will build itself based on what settings are available. And if you're on a platform that supports certain kinds of ray tracing or certain shadows or whatever, you should be able to enable or disable them. And I think that what a lot of developers do is they build a settings page and manually drag in some checkboxes and set things up, and that's fine. But you're kind of stuck then. You have to physically edit the menus every time you want a new checkbox. Like I've added a new type of shadow renderer, or I want to add fog, it's a fog slider suddenly. So you shouldn't have to rewrite code just because you'd like to add an option for someone to toggle that. So also from personal experience, it's really nice to have debug settings. There should be some mode which shows hidden settings in the settings menu for things like show logs or draw gizmos or draw raycast or something that allows you to test your project on devices easier. There are solutions. One of the most common one I've seen is some sort of console that pops up and you register commands, and you can do it that way. But I mean, if you're building a UI, to me, it's always nicer to just pop in some UI elements as well, right? There's no reason to rely exclusively on console commands. But anyway, so this is again, it's not for anything. It's just
Yeah,
I was kind of passing some time on the weekend. I wanted to de-stress from other projects, and this felt like a pretty straightforward thing to work on.
sounds good. Um, yeah, I've been working on stuff this weekend as well. Did a bunch of streams yesterday. Maybe I think 7 or 8 hours total of streaming, plus a little bit more coding in the middle, and we got a lot of great stuff done on Legend of the Stones. Um, got
I did
stuck
see one of
at
your
the
streams
end.
started at 4 a.m. my time, and I was like, no, no way I'm making that. I'm going to bed.
If you saw it at 4 a.m. your time, that means you weren't asleep. So, um, yeah, that's something. That says something right there. Uh, yeah, but I remember last time you were in the stream, you saw my console and you had a reaction to the console.
I did, yeah. So I was just thinking, from personal experience, it would stress me out trying to find anything of value in a giant sea of logs. So the logs are fine, like you can have as many log messages as you like, but there's a point where what do they call it, signal to noise ratio. And I know that I've worked on many projects where you end up with so many logs, you're sitting there going, I know I logged a valuable piece of information here somewhere, but I'm still getting logs about the inventory, even though I'm not even working on the inventory right now because they're all just here and I can't do anything about them. So that's one thing that really stuck out to me is that if I always set it up so every system object or thing can be like non-contributing to logs if I wanted to, just to peel things back, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That makes sense. So we don't have any questions yet. We've got fewer viewers than usual, so that could be why we have no questions. But again, feel free to ask questions. And before we get to the next step, like, subscribe. Definitely check out Jason's Ko-fi page or coffee page. I think it's coffee. I say Ko-fi, but
Yep.
yeah,
I think, what do I say? Do I say Kofi as well, don't I? It's confusing. Yeah.
it's because they spelled it wrong. So definitely check that out. That's right here. And you got links to your YouTube there, which is now being populated with wonderful videos.
Cool. And it's just my name, thankfully, that I was able to just set up youtube.com/Jason Storey. There's no confusing prefixes or suffixes, which is nice.
That's helpful. And then check out Infinity PBR. And if you click this See All Assets, you will check out the assets from Infinity PBR. And Urizer has asked what my background is. This is my background. I use this for work too. Funny that. This is actually the Medieval Environment Pack. It's a video I made from the package, and if you go into that, you can actually see that is part of this here. It's this beginning part, but I just looped it. And so now it's in the background, and it looks really pretty, and people comment on it when I'm in meetings and I'm meeting them for the first time. So it's better than my actual background right now. I'm in the process of getting a Kallax shelf so that I can look more like Jason's background. Fill it with board games to make board gamers jealous. Add some colorful lights. But unfortunately, IKEA is out of Kallax shelves right now. Thank you to Talalas for subscribing. I don't know, Jason, if you can hear the noise when the zombie comes on the screen.
I cannot, no.
Oh, that's too bad. You're missing out. Whenever somebody subscribes, a zombie comes on the screen and distracts me because I can hear it and it's quite loud for me. I'm assuming everybody else can see it and hear it too, but who knows? Sorry, that sidetracked me. But yes, IKEA's out of Kallax. I blame the pandemic.
Yeah. They are a popular thing. They're very easy to set up. They look pretty good, and they're about as, multi-purpose as you can get. I use them for a combination of the bottom entire row. I use like as bucket drawers of stuff. Top ones are shelves. I have glass panels in some of them to kind of show off the fancier collectible things. I have to say, it was my first choice when I had the option to sort of set up an office wall. I was like, you can't not go Kallax. Like they sort of set themselves up perfectly.
Yeah. The Kallax, I've got a couple under my desk. I got a couple 2x2s under the desk, but those won't work back there. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to show you. Well, we can hide this. I'm going to show you the scene, and here's my console. Let me throw this up here for now, and you can all enjoy. Apologies for the UI of Zoom. We'll move that down there. This is what happens when I press play. Now, I like my console. I'm going to start with that. I did press play. It just takes a minute. There we go. Look at that. All this valuable information. Now, I learned from you, Jason, how to make these colorful and large, and so I did that.
I know. I feel like I contributed to the problem. I just gave you more colors to paint with.
You did. And I said, I'm going to throw these all on the wall. Now, I use the console to remind myself where I do important things. So, setting up the player, scenes registered, set up UI elements. And so whenever I need to go back and be like, oh, shoot, where do I set up the player? I could just, oh, yeah, it must be right here. And then I can go and do more player setup work. But you have a reaction to this. And this is collapsed. Mm-hmm. You don't like this.
Well, for starters, it says set player avatar values twice there to me. And that's like, I know you're setting up different characters, but
4 times.
Effectively, 4 times, right? So, but the idea is that once you're setting it up, like if you're not currently working on player avatar values, that's not going to change, right? Like for the duration, if you're working on some other system, you now have to scroll past all of these every time to go through what you're looking for. And if there is a bug, you're using debug.error or the exception one for things like this should not be called anymore. Which if you had an actual null pointer exception or some error that was blocking your code, you'd have a hard time finding it because normally the way you search for that is via the red icons versus the other colored icons, but you're using the red icons to indicate information that doesn't mean exception, right? So there's some sort of conflict in terms of usage and naming. And the easier way to do that is usually to have the log messages. You use warning for information you need to know about that isn't critical, and then things that will cause an application to break, they're the red ones. And then you would have these filtered by types, and then you could toggle on and off the types that are registering. So the way I traditionally do it is you consider logs per so forget about the actual console for a second and think about a script. You have a script like player setup. There's multiple levels of interest there. There is tell me if something breaks. Just show me the red things. Tell me if something breaks or something doesn't feel right. It's not configured correctly. Things that might be missing or values don't add up in terms of inventory counts or something. Then there's tell me everything. All the single individual details, print out the whole log message of every step you're taking. And those are different log levels. And theoretically, you should be able to pick a single system like setup and say log level all the way out to 4 or log level to 1. And you just pick a number and that number increases in amount of information you're getting. Or traditionally you do it the reverse. You'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then they go to the exceptions. But effectively what I mean is you should be able to pick one thing and say, I just want to see bad things from this system, or I want to see every single thing about this system. Mm-hmm. And having that freedom is usually a good idea. So it's not about, there's nothing wrong with having this many logs. It's the fact that you don't, if I said to you now, just show me the logs related exclusively to the character setup, there's you'd have to scroll and find it, and there's sections and stuff around it. And it would, if you had the freedom to turn other stuff off temporarily, it would be a lot easier,
True.
Also, a separate note from that, if you did separate it out, you can separate out the provider, which means if you said, I want to print out the console or save them out to a file of just the stuff related to this topic, it would be easier for you to get that information from somebody. Say there's an issue in their code or something, or in their build, you could ask them to send you the log file. Now, Unity has a log file, but that's even more of a problem because it's all of Unity stuff as well as your stuff. Having your own log file that's just my things would make it easier to save or share that if you weren't using a web-based logging thing, which is a whole different conversation.
Okay. So that leads to a very important question. How? Now, I've got all these scripts, and you're right. Some of them have things that shouldn't be here. I'll be honest. Actually, I think this should be called. This is actually the next thing that I'm going to be working on. So we'll finally figure out whether this should or shouldn't be called. But a lot of this stuff doesn't need to be here. So this stuff doesn't need to be here. So I can honestly delete those because that was old and I never deleted it before.
Before I delete them, this, because I guess this gets to the point. The fact that you put them in there means you wanted information at some point, and you might even want it again. And I think this is one problem that people have with logs, is they see it as one absolute or another. They either are debugging something, so they dump a load of logs in their code, or they think it's fixed, so they delete all the logs and they're back to being clear again. But then what if something goes wrong again and they want to find it? They now have to rewrite all of the log messages in again. So in an ideal world, you should be able to leave the log messages in, but then just toggle them on and off if they're displaying.
There's
there's kind of levels of this, but we can go through it kind of in slow incremental steps. And this also, separately from this topic, this is a good example of how you refactor. A lot of people look at this stuff and go, how do I take a big system that's doing X and make it do Y? Well, the answer is slowly. There's going to be a lot of stuff, but there's ways to step closer to a better architecture without like gutting everything or going crazy, right? So we can just move you in a direction that I think will be easier to maintain, you know?
All right. Is this the type of thing where one script controls everything, or do you put this sort of feature on every script or every system?
So when it comes to refactoring out something like this, the way you tend to do it is you start with kind of locally where the problem is. So if the problem is every script right now prints a load of log messages, well, the first question is, what if you wanted to turn off log messages in one script? The answer is you can't really do it right now. So let's just move it one layer out. And then we do that each time. And then we get to the point where the question becomes, can we make a global thing? Maybe, but until you can already control them on a per script level, you won't be able to control them on a more global level. So it's kind of like incremental steps. So if you pick any script there, we can go in as an example.
Okay. Well, we do have a question from Zapran. He's asking what the upcoming milestones are for Legend of the Stones. So for those of you who are new to my channel, I live stream my development of this game, Legend of the Stones. Epic RPG. It's going to be amazing. I'll be a millionaire, mind you. So you better get to know me now before I stop knowing the little people. The next step is actually about scene loading, and maybe that's where we can start as well, Jason. So every scene in the game will have this scene. It's not going to be open world where it just streams. It's going to load each level, each scene as you go there. Every scene is going to have a scene data, and then the game itself is going to save pertinent scene data in the data structure here. That's the idea. It's not working right now. Hey, Jason Wyman liked and subscribed. Good for him. He was already subscribed though, so he just liked. But so this is happening in multiple places. When we talk about the scene being loaded, the scene being registered, set up player, happens all over the place. But this is my data class. And then we also have the scene class itself, which has additional things, which I don't think there's any debug logs, or there's one right here. So maybe we should start with this because it's a much smaller script.
That sounds like a good idea. Yep.
Okay, good.
So I guess where's our first log message coming out of the scene system, I guess?
Right here. Scene setup.
Okay, so to really kind of dive in, we'll take this in incremental steps. The first thing is on line 55, he unsubscribed and resubscribed. There you go. On line 55, that is a singleton. And this gets exactly to the question that people talk about. Are singletons good or bad? That's another video for another day, but I'll give you a sneak peek of my opinion here, which is forget about the philosophy of whether people like it or not, or if it sounds good or bad, and just ask ourselves a very simple question. We're using debug.log in a number of places here. And if I asked you, say you wanted to say, I want a checkbox, I want a Boolean flag, if should log, or if is logging, and every one of those logs should turn off or on, could you do it right now? And how would you do it? And I would guess, because there's no, every single one of these things is calling into that singleton, you would have to put a if is logging on top of every single debug.log message across this script, right? There's no other way to sort of gate the behavior. But if we do one small thing, which is if you go to line 58 and just make a method called log, so just void log, and it takes in an object. Yeah, object message. And all that does is call debug.log.
If I can spell things right.
And do lowercase o for object. You don't need the class type. So now, if you change that above one, debug.log, to just log, and say there's a few, there's probably one or two, you can delete that one. Is there any other ones in as well?
I think this one, since I just started working on it, only has the one.
Okay, that's
it's
good. Okay,
early. early in the process. I got notes to myself, and that's about it.
So say you now had log written in 10 places in the code, and I said
Mm-hmm.
to you, I want every log message out of this script to be read, or every log message out of this script turn on or off. How hard would that be now? Right? There's one place on line 61 where every single one of those things can be decided on. So by just wrapping it once in one method, what you're doing is you're separating the concern from the singleton. So it is a singleton. It's still debug.log is a singleton. But the reason singletons are bad are not that they're a singleton. It's that by having one entry point, if something around it changes, you have to change it in every single place you reference it. But just by wrapping it one time, you are now saying in here on line 61, anything that happens to, like if you wanted to turn off that logging altogether, you just comment that line out. Or if you wanted to
Mm-hmm.
go to a different logging thing altogether, like say you wanted every one of these logs to go to text mesh pro label, you would comment out debug.log, bring in a text mesh pro, and right there, dot text plus equals message, right? There's now one place across this whole script to change how logs function. So that's one step removed. We can go like 12 steps, but for the first step, that already keeps things separated out from where everything else is. So the first thing I like to do is do that Boolean check. So have some Boolean like is logging or logging enabled. I usually call it logging enabled. But if you put that somewhere at the top of your script, that now gives you a global statement on this object and say, I want logs to come out of this object, yes or no. Yeah. And now
Okay.
you can just put that, if not logging, at the top of your log message. Yep, if not logging, then return. There you go. So now, with just that one simple change, every log in this script, if you decide you don't want it to log anymore, it's a single checkbox in the editor. Now, that's not super beneficial, it's just slightly nicer, but already it means if you're looking at stuff and one particular script is spamming the console, you can just say, just go to it, stops logging, right?
Okay. That sounds good.
So the next problem, I guess, from that is, as you said, that's like per script, which is
Yeah.
useful, but you do have to go in and find every object and checkbox something on and off, which ideally you'd want a little more kind of a little more control over it than that. And so the way you
Certainly.
do that is some kind of strategy is what they call it, which is basically, look, if I have to manage my own logging, I have to do all of this checkbox stuff on and off myself. If I just defer that statement to somebody else and say, there is a thing that does the logging, go ask him, I don't know, then everything becomes slightly easier again. So to do that, we have to go one step further and make a class out of this. So if you go down to the bottom and just outside the namespace there, and just, yeah, right there, we'll make a interface, call it ILogger.
All right. So this is where I start going public interface.
Yep,
Yes.
exactly, yeah.
I logger. I
Yep.
I
And
logger.
then we define a basic contract, and we're just going to do exactly the same thing. It'll just be a void, log, and an object. That's all that a logger does at the moment. Yeah. And it's got no behavior on this. Interface is just the concept of a contract. So
Oh,
you can
so
delete those
nothing like
two.
this.
Semicolon.
So it's just like that.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's just the conceptually there is something somewhere called a logger, and it does log stuff. I don't care about it. It deals with that problem.
Okay.
Now, if you scroll up to your script somewhere and just make an instance of ILogger,
What do you mean an instance of ILogger?
so we'll say on 13, just write ILogger space underscore logger, or just logger, whatever you want to call it. Yep. So that's now a thing that does log stuff. All right. And so if you scroll down to your log method that you've written, instead of talking directly to debug.log, which is I am Unity's logger, I do Unity related log stuff. If you now talk to your logger, so underscore logger.log, you now have completely removed any reference to any particular implementation of how logging works. There is something that is passed into this script at some stage that somehow deals with logging. It's a very vague statement, but that's kind of the point, right?
So let me just make sure I'm wrapping my own head around this. So usually when I see interface, I would go up here and say ILogger or whatnot. So I'm not doing that here.
Not yet. We'll actually be doing that soon. But for starters, all that the interface means is I am the concept of a contract, a set of rules. So, for example, a interface for a delivery service is you give me a package, you give me an address, I will deliver it to the address. Or a contract for a restaurant might be we give you a list of items, you pick one of the items, you give us money, we give you the food. It doesn't tell you how that happens, whether the chef is a particular person or if it's a robot, doesn't really matter to you. The contract is providing we agree on I do these things for you, you do these things for me, stuff works out. You can kind of leave that very vague. So in our case, what does logging really mean? There is a piece of information I have that I want to tell somebody. So here's the information, log it. What does log mean? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if it connects to a toaster, prints it out on the toaster, and emails it to people. I don't know. It can be anything at all. It can be the most ridiculous thing in the world. But the point is, my job is done when I have the information I want to give you, and I give it to you, and then I'm complete. So we actually currently in our system, we don't even have any loggers yet. We've made an interface, we've made a contract that says there are things that can receive logs. I don't know what they are, but this is the vague contract. If anything wants to register itself as a logger, all it has to do is implement that contract, and providing it knows how to do that, it can be passed into this and respond to logs.
Okay.
So the first thing we can do is give ourselves back the old behavior, which is make a logger that supports the Unity logger, if that makes sense. We say we'll make our own version of logger, which says, oh, what do I do when I receive a message for a log? I give it to Unity. That's not my problem. So now we're just giving ourselves back the old behavior, but we're doing it via an abstract contract.
And so this is calling log on. Well, this just defines the contract.
Exactly. But now we have to make something which like supports that contract. So if we underneath that one again, underneath the ILogger.
Underneath here?
Yeah, we'll just make another one called public class Unity logger. And this one will just implement ILogger. So this is where the thing you were talking about comes into play. Yeah, you don't need the round brackets there. Oh. And it'll tell you, in order to be a ILogger, you need to do something. That's why it's red. It'll say, you don't currently support the contract that you're claiming to be, which is a logger. In order to do that, you have to prove to me you can support that functionality. And so if you click on the red line, it'll specifically tell you that. It'll say, does not implement interface, and you can implement the members. It'll say, this is the minimum behavior you need to have to be a logger. And so what does a Unity logger do when it logs? Well, it calls Unity's debug.log and so on. So it's only part of the way there, but the point is now, this will only give us back our same behavior, but it'll do it in a much clearer way. So now if we scroll up to the top, we could say in our awake function, and we'll keep it simple to start. So we could say somewhere here, underscore logger equals new Unity logger. So now we're saying the thing that is the logger for this script happens to be a Unity logger. Okay. And then all subsequent logs go to Unity logs. But what's cool about this is we can provide any kind of logger we want. So just for an example, if we scroll down again, we can make a second type of logger just for a bit of contrast. So make one, I call it TMP logger, or whatever you want, doesn't really matter. And this is going to also implement ILogger. And it'll also need implement the function. And in this case, what we're going to do is if you go up above line 127 and write CTOR and press tab. Oh. That one above it, there you go. Now, so this is the constructor. I don't want to get too much into, I don't know how familiar you are with constructors and stuff because Unity hides all of that stuff. Suffice it to say, this is the place where this is like the awake function for non-mono behaviors. So we'll just say this is where stuff starts up. And what we care about is we want to send log messages to a TextMesh Pro label, for example. Or are you using TextMesh Pro?
I'm not.
Okay, just call it text logger then. We'll just use a normal text label. But the beauty of this system is that we can just decide to make different ones later. So what you need to do is we want to log to a text label. So inside those brackets, you can pass in a text label you'd like to log to. So inside public text logger in round brackets, pass in under those round brackets text label.
I see.
So yeah, so text is the type and label is the name of it. Yeah, and
And
it'll
we'll
ask you to import
add
that.
in the UI text.
Yeah, yeah, and now if you click label and click Alt Enter, it should give you the option to auto create local field. Yep, that one. And so now what we've done is we've said when you create a text logger, you have to give me the label you would like to go to. So now we can assign text to that label. So on 136 here, we could say underscore label dot text. Don't worry, we'll pause after this. I know it's a lot of written a lot of stuff. Right, plus equals, and then do $ quotes, and then in there curly brackets, and then message in there, and then just to the right of that, do /n.
So new line.
Yeah, exactly.
And for the folks at home who, like me, have never used this, this is called not literal, or I mean, essentially, what I would usually do, and I think maybe a lot of people do, would be something like this.
Yes, plus on the different things, yeah.
Yeah, and it's essentially the same thing, but
it is. But so the one you did is what's called string concatenation, and it basically says make a string, add a string to it, add another string to it, and this is kind of like a math operation. You're adding different functions to each other. Now the thing is, without getting too deep into memory and performance and blah blah blah, with creating a string is a task the computer has to do. It costs performance and it creates garbage to generate a string. And so the less pluses in your strings, the less work that you have to do academically in the background. So by creating the $ index, there's actually another version as well, just like this. I'll actually show you that one just for fun. If you make a third line, you can do underscore label dot text plus equals, and then write string dot format. Yeah, and then round brackets and quotes. Now this time, inside the quotes, do the curly brackets. So quotes first.
Oh, quotes.
Yeah, and do it this time. Put a 0 inside of that. So this gets a bit weird. Put a 0 there. Yep. Then closing it, and then /n there. And then go right. Put a comma, and then write message.
Here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this was the original format structure. So the difference was, the first way you do it creates a new string, another new string, another new string, adds all three together. The bottom one basically says create a string with blank spots in it. /0, /1, /2, /3, and then here's a collection of variables and swap out each one for index 0, index 1, index 2, index 3. And that's the way that people have been doing it for a long time. But it can get a bit confusing, right? When you're trying to say which one is index 3 again, and you have to make sure your variables are in the right order and blah, blah, blah. So they introduced 136, which is this much nicer way of saying in line, put that variable in that place, and it just does the magic for you. So all three do the same thing. The first and the third one are slightly better performance. There's actually even more performant methods than these, but talking about character spans is out of scope, and string builders is a whole different conversation. But of these three, the top one allows you to kind of structure a sentence where you can just put the variables in it without extra codey nonsense like pluses and stuff like that, you know?
Okay. So there's a real reason to use it besides just preference. Good to know.
That's the
Thank
same
you
thing
for
for most things in code. There is most things aren't just stylistic, but it's a much longer conversation. Either way, I want to pause here anyway because we've done a lot of stuff. All I want to highlight is we've now got two types of things: a logger conceptually, a thing that logs stuff, a thing that logs stuff via Unity, and then a thing that logs stuff via some sort of text label, right?
Yeah.
And if you wanted to swap these out, if you scroll all the way to the top again, what you can do is underneath the awake function, wherever that is.
Right here.
Yeah, so next line under this one, you could write underscore logger equals new text logger. And if you did pass in TextMesh Pro label here, magically all of your logs would start going there instead, because you've now provided that as a different option. Okay. And that means you could put a Boolean here and say, if should log the TextMesh Pro, turn the second one on, otherwise do, you know what I mean? So you already, we don't actually have to go anywhere near the log method, the logger stuff. We could just use logger.log anywhere in our code now, and we have control of it at a more global level. So we've taken a lot of that decision making out of the code. Now it's still in the same script. That's part of the problem, but we're already like much further removed. Like notice how we haven't gone back to the log method in a while now because we don't need to. We can make more decisions here without ever going near that. And just to prove that point again, let's make a third logger just as a random idea. We'll make the class first.
Oh.
Yes, let's scroll down to the bottom. And we'll call this a color logger. Mm-hmm. Now, and this is where we're going to get a little bit crazy because this is kind of, I don't know if I should do. Yeah, I will go crazy just because why not? We'll be a bit fun with this.
Live a little. It's Sunday, it's weekend. We're all
yeah.
having fun.
Why not? Okay, so here's where I'm going to blow your mind a little bit. Make another constructor for this one. So go above 144 and write CTOR. Mm-hmm. Now the first parameter we're going to take into this one is an ILogger.
Okay.
I know, yeah. This is where we're getting weird, right? So, yeah. And so just make that a local field. If you click on the variable and then Alt Enter, it should give you the option to make it serialized field. Yeah. And now on 153, you can call ilogger.log and the message. Now we'll pause for a second because this is a bit weird. So this is a pass-through. This doesn't do anything. This is a class which takes in a logger and then just hands it to another logger. And so before we do anything crazy, let's show how that works. If you scroll up and see where